Welcome to The Quill and the Quantum, the podcast where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and the art of writing. I'm your host, Kathy Norris, and in each episode, we'll talk to those authors and other creatives who use or refuse to use AI in their writing process. Today's guest is author A.G. Riddle, or Jerry Riddle. Jerry spent 10 years starting internet companies before quitting to follow his true passion, which is writing fiction. He is now a best-selling author with over 5 million books in 20 different languages worldwide. Jerry, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So my very first question is, how do you use AI in your creative process?
Well, I write, science fiction thrillers or techno thrillers, and so the research is what I've used it for to date, and it's helped a great deal. The research, and then I've used it some for ideas. If I'm stuck or thinking through something, I'll bounce. I'll sort of brainstorm with it, but mostly for research.
Yes, it's amazing how much faster the research is with AI regardless of the platform. Things that used to take forever to pull together, you have in seconds. It's really quite startling.
It really is. I mean, I find a great starting point, and then I can dive deeper on things or it's a great way to find some source material. It's a
Mm-hmm.
good starting point. And yeah, so I think, it's cut down the time a great deal. I mean, versus doing a Google search, and certainly Google is using AI for the search results, and that was traditionally my sort of starting method. But I find AI much more efficient.
Mm-hmm. In your latest thriller, Labyrinth, you described this high-tech conspiracy to create a digital virtual reality, and you posed the central question about whether this is digital heaven or cyber hell. And I'm wondering, what were you observing out in the world that made you want to pose this question and take a shot at it in Labyrinth?
Well, I think, I'm a father of two, I have a daughter who's 9 and a son who's 4, and I sort of wonder what the world they're going to grow up in and be adults in is going to look like. And I think it's very different. I was born in the late 70s and, um, grew up with the internet when I was a teenager. And when I was in college, it was really starting to take off, and, I've seen the world change. And I was really thinking about the confluence of AI and virtual reality and how that might shape life in the future, and how, in the event that AI makes work, not completely optional, but more optional, and if we have a civilization in which people work less and people work principally from home, does virtual reality become a larger part of daily life, and what does that look like? And if, I think Labyrinth sort of explores this topic that I haven't seen addressed in a fictional novel before, which is what, the sort of endless possibilities of generative AI in a virtual reality context, in which you could explore and live out any adventure that your mind could imagine. Generative AI could sort of indulge you and sort of unfold, and sort of the addictive or sort of boundless attraction of that for a lot of humans, I think.
Truly. You had mentioned in your author's notes that you had to do more rewrites on Labyrinth than any other book you had written before. And I'm curious, why was that?
Well, so in Labyrinth, I had a pretty good outline, or what I thought was a pretty good outline, and two things happened. One is that the characters evolved a great deal, and so when I got to certain parts in the outline I was writing, and I sort of thought, well, that character wouldn't do that, or this it doesn't ring true to me. And I think if you're gonna, my feeling is, to produce the best product you can, it's got to be believable on the page for the reader, and that sort of comes first. If they believe it's happening, especially in a science fiction novel or a science fiction thriller, you're taking them on a fantastical journey where you're introducing things that are speculative about the future. And so if they don't believe the characters and the emotional authenticity, I think it's hard for them to sort of go along for the other sort of fantastical elements. But that was one thing. And then the other was that certain plot twist I didn't think really worked. And other ideas occurred to me along the way. And I thought, well, that's a lot better. You know, that what I had originally, my first instinct on how to do that or how to explain that to the reader, there's a better way to do it. So I kept seeing opportunities and I pursued them. And it caused a lot of work. You know, I was almost in a recursive loop a couple of times where, yeah, I get to the outline and I write I did not write what I thought. I wrote something else and I was like, well, now these five things need to change. And the book is 200,000 words or about 800 pages in print. So it was, I mean, it was a long book to write, period. But to rewrite an 800-page book is as agonizing as it sounds. So it was pretty rough.
Oh, it is agonizing. I shudder to think that I would be, 200,000 words in and then and realize, oh, this is not going to work. But you've got to listen to the characters. I mean, you've got to
Yeah.
listen to if something's not working, forcing it isn't going to make it any better.
Right. And it's something that eats away at me. Even if I do it and I think, well, that doesn't quite work, and I keep going, it just like day after day, I'm just like, I gotta go back and fix that. That wasn't right.
I
It's
know
terrible.
and it's amazing to me. And how do you do your plot development? It sounded like you have a pretty good outline or idea before you begin the first word.
Yeah, I like to have an outline, and my outlines have gotten, a little bit looser as I've gone along. And I guess I don't learn from past experience because this one was too detailed. But I like to have at least, I start with an idea that I'm really interested in because, if you're doing a lot of research and spending years writing a book, I think you've got to really be on fire for the topic, and I come up with a premise and then a sort of broad story arc of, what happens to the characters? How do they transform? What's the resolution of this big, huge hole in their life? And then I try to get an ending that I'm really excited about, and I think it's going to be worth it for readers to get to. Because my biggest fear is, they've invested all this time and money in a book that they get to the end and think, well, that wasn't, you know that
What was
was
that?
a letdown. What was that? A total, that it wasn't worth it. And yeah. And so I try to, that's my process. And then as you heard, I write it and then keep rewriting it to torture myself. So
Well, you mentioned that your first book took you 2.5 years to write. Has that time shortened with experience? Please say yes.
well, it has shortened in the middle of my career, but this, Labyrinth took me 2 years, so I can't I can't say I'm getting, but it's 50% longer than my first book. But I mean the writing is sort of the tip of the iceberg in a
Yeah.
book like Labyrinth because you've got the research, you've got the editing, the planning, and everything, and just stringing the words together almost becomes the easy part. But I think if you're doing this job correctly and learning the craft, you're going to get faster and you're going to get more confident. Um, but I also think that being a writer, part of the process is constantly trying to get better, reflecting and saying, um, and sort of keeping up with what your interests are because they could change over time, whether it's genre or, you're more plot focused or character focused or you like first writing first person or third person. And so I think sorting those things out tend to make at least the process of writing easier.
Hmm.
But then you've got, the business and the sort of day to day of being an author, which is not easy once you've published a lot of books. You're getting reviews. You're dealing with now a team of people, and just sort of
Mm.
you're juggling a lot. It's when you're first starting out, all you have to worry about is the words and the writing and getting better at writing. And then later in your career, that you still have that, and that's sort of the central focus, but there's more things.
You know, you had mentioned earlier that you use AI primarily for research, and I'm wondering, do you think, and because there's been so much discussion about, how creatives should handle AI, do you think it should be left up to the individual author to decide how they use AI, or do you think that the book publishing industry or the industry in general should set standards or guidelines around its use?
Well, I'm not quite sure. It's a question I haven't really thought about extensively. I guess you know, I started an internet company in college and did that for 10 years before, but writing was or reading science fiction was my first love. Like I come to the business of writing as a reader first and someone for whom books have been a very important part of my life. Um, and as a sort of someone with a technology background, I suppose I see it through a little different lens in that, these new disruptive technologies inevitably
Hmm.
are inevitable. They're very hard to once the genie is out of the bottle, it's very hard to put back in. I know or I have heard that there are ways to detect if a book is written by AI. I don't know to the extent that that's true or how much this can be policed, to use a word. But I also don't, the industry today is very different than it was 30 years ago. You no longer need an agent or a publisher. You can self-publish to the internet. So if an author is so inclined, they can certainly generate books with AI and distribute them directly to readers. So I think publisher standards, whether offered may not be observed. So I think, I certainly know of publishers who've said, if we see an author submitting AI, generated or dependent work, we're not interested in it. And I think that's their right.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think there's going to be a lot of those folks. I also think there's probably going to be publishers that take a laissez-faire approach. So, if you
Mhm.
submit good work, we don't particularly care how you create it. And so I don't know. It's a good question, and I think it's one that's evolving. Even, you know, I've sort of tried to reduce my involvement in social media, but I go on for, for work and the books and to try to keep up and learn. And AI is a big topic among authors. So I don't know. And it's a topic that evokes big feelings for
Well,
sure.
there's so many different fascinating directions we could head from your answer. I was going to ask you about publishing, and you know got that out of the way. I do want to ask. I can remember you said you got into writing as a result of your love of reading, and it brought me back to the first science fiction I had read, which was Ray Bradbury, and I will never forget. Fahrenheit 451, and that first sentence. It was a pleasure to burn. And I can remember just thinking, getting chills, going, "Oh, that's so good." Do you have an author or when you were starting out, was there an author that really grabbed you?
Well, as a kid, I grew up in a very small town in North Carolina, and I was born in 1979, so that dates my career in life. But there was not enough science fiction on TV. There was Star Trek, The Next Generation, and then there was the X-Files. But then, so books became a way for me and science fiction for me was an intellectual outlet. It was a place to explore ideas and the sort of big thoughts that were rattling around in my head that no one else seemed to be interested in or having for that matter. But I remember reading Dan Simmons' novel Hyperion, and I must have been a teenager when I read it. But Hyperion is a frame story, and I'd never read a frame story before. And the depth of how he told the story and how just radically different and interesting it was, uh, really struck me. As before, I guess all the books I had read, I had sort of read the books because I was out of movies and TV,
Yeah.
and out of video games. But that sort of, for me anyway. demonstrated that the medium of books has something transcendental and something different, and as a power that
Yes.
those other mediums don't, and I don't think can have. But so I really enjoyed that, and then later, and so I'm a sort of a pretty indiscriminate science fiction reader. So I read like Star Trek novels all the time, and my wife is like, "Man, your bar is so low for science fiction." And I just say, it's true. Like I'm a sucker for any sort of
What
anything
can
sci-fi
I
deals.
say?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm pretty easy. But the the books that I was reading in say 2010 or two, I guess, yeah, about 2010, such as Hugh Howey's Wool, and then Andy Weir's The Martian, and things like
Ah, yes.
that came out on Kindle, that were self-published. And I thought, gosh, here are folks. I mean, these guys are just like me. They're just science fiction geeks that, have written something and put it on the internet. And I think, that's what sort of encouraged me to try my hand at writing, and to see, if this be a hobby or a career. And but yeah, my life has been reading has been, a big part of my life. But
Oh, I think for most authors, or the ones that in my experience, yes, the authors that grab me are usually readers themselves.
yeah.
And I think this is, it brings us back full circle, and a great place to bring the interview to a close. Is there anything that I left out, that a question that you were dying to be asked, and you were like, oh, I hope Kathy asks me this question. Do you? Oh, please, Kathy, please. Is there something along those lines, or anything that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I guess just if the audience is out there thinking about writing or working on their first book, I would say just keep going,
Yeah.
and I think the especially writing a first novel, just keep in mind nobody's going to see it until you're ready. And then, you can
Oh,
just
that's
you get infinite
great.
do-overs, right? Like it's not like a real job, like a job where you go to the office and you have to be in a meeting. Like you can't just hit the pause button and redo that meeting if you don't get your presentation right, with your manuscript, if you don't like that paragraph, you just erase it, and keep going. And I think that's a key point. And I think the other is that, you know, try to figure out what you can do really well and what you can't. And I think that in what I've learned in this business is that you make a living and you find an audience with the things you do well.
Mm,
And you don't have to play every position on the baseball field. Like you don't have to be a great pitcher and outfielder and first baseman. You don't have to be great at dialogue and grammar and plotting and all the things. It's just like if you're writing a techno thriller, you've got to be really good at the science, and you've got to have good pacing, and
hmm
you've got to have a good hook. But if your dialogue is not rewriting literary theory, those readers are probably going to give you a little grace. I'm not sure in contemporary romance, your dialogue probably needs to be a little tighter, but anyway, all that to say is, keep going, figure out what you can do well, and then and then don't despair. If you can't do everything really well, it doesn't matter.
Well, I'm torn between, which line to use for close, because you've given us two great ones, which such one, number one being nobody's going to read it unless you write it, so,
Right.
that's just the way that works. And then if you don't, and you don't have to play every position on the baseball field, which is so true. And as readers, we know when we're reaching for a Stephen King, or we're reaching for um, Toni Morrison, we know what we're expecting.
Right.
We're not expecting the same thing from these authors. We're looking for something different, and that's okay. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And those are great examples of people who do things really well, and then um and it takes a while. It takes a while to realize that. And you get reviews, people saying, "Hey, this part of this book was not good." And you just have to sit back and say, "Well, I don't do that particular thing very well." So, if that's what you're looking for, it's not, this is not the place, but it is what it is.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. This has been a pleasure. Most definitely. And to our viewing audience, links to Jerry's webpage are going to be in the show notes. Please be sure to pick up a copy of his latest endeavor, Labyrinth. It's a good read, I promise you. And on that note, oh, Jerry, I'm going to try my new tagline out on you. We'll see how this works. I've got a new, last night it seemed brilliant. Let's see. So, to all the writers out there, may you find the perfect word. May you complete an imperfect first draft. And may you have the wisdom to know the difference.
Oh,
Oh, see, Jerry, I thought, you know.
I was getting misty there. No, I think it's really good.
Well, say no more. Say no more.
I endorse that
You,
tagline.
you endorse this
Yeah.
this this product or slogan. I hear you. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. You go on and enjoy. Now, what time is it where you are?
10:13. Yeah.
10:13. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day with
Yeah,
the
you too.
exhibit.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a real pleasure. You take care now.
Thank you.